that our economic prospects are deeply tied to regional integration, to trade corridors, energy cooperation, and diplomatic credibility. And people can say these are ceremonial exercises, but they are not. They are economic instruments that determine access, but also determine competitiveness as well as long-term growth. On the domestic front, in 2025, we were forced to confront the realities of public finance. We reported extensively on salary adjustments. We reported on expenditure pressures, as well as fiscal trade-offs facing government. Conversations that were not abstract. They touched households directly, raising questions about affordability, productivity, and sustainability. A lot of those conversations, indeed, interviews with our economist, Saneless Bia. And then global financial conditions continued to tighten. The cost of borrowing rose, and governments everywhere, including ours here at home, were reminded that every policy choice carries a price and every delay compounds cost. And that is therefore why we were intentional about having analysts on the show to discuss and have these engagements around those particular developing stories. But one of the most understated but significant developments of the year last year was the operationalization of the Eswatini payment switch. You will remember it was led by the Central Bank of Eswatini, and we made host of some of the countries that were helping us benchmark as well as implement. And it may not have made daily headlines, but its implications are far-reaching. They are real-time, and interoperable payments across financial institutions represent foundational shift for commerce, for small businesses, for financial inclusion, as well as digital efficiency. And in many ways, this infrastructure quietly redefined how money moves in Eswatini and how opportunity can follow it. So we're excited for 2026 to see how that continues to develop. But we also spent time interrogating the evolving relationship between citizens as well as the state here in the Kingdom of Eswatini. A timely conversation, because a country without its people is just existing in a vacuum. And then we had conversation around digital government services to regulatory reviews across broadcasting, across ICT, as well as financial services. 2025 reflected a growing expectation from the public that institutions must be accessible, that they must be responsive and transparent. Now, services should meet people where they are. That is always a conversation. And that technology should not simply modernize systems, but it should also improve lived experience. At the same time, 2025 reminded us of our vulnerability. Remember, we covered destructive hailstorms, and a lot of them happened towards the end of the year, and you are awake to the persistent and consistent rainfall that is quite erratic and frightening at the very same pace that we continue to experience. So we covered destructive hailstorms, we covered flooding and extreme weather events that damaged crops. Remember that 500 hectare of maize from the past 2 weeks. Also, we saw destruction in homes as well as infrastructure. Climate shocks were no longer just theoretical. They were risks that were discussed in policy documents. They were lived realities for communities across the country, and they raised urgent questions about preparedness, resilience, food security, and the cost of inaction. The NDMA has been on standby every time we call them to ask what is happening, how are they responding. Mekmen Mahlalela, their head of communications, has been quite proactive in trying to help us really understand the state of their preparedness, but also we want to be more intentional as we head into 2020, as we are in 2026, I beg your pardon, as we continue with the year, to go on the ground and speak to the victims. Of course, we did have the visuals of the destruction, and we showed you real time what was happening on the ground, because we didn't want to filter anything. We wanted to be as honest and as impartial as we can. So as we continue with 2026, we have heard commitments from the NDMA as well as from the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister around the intentional efforts that they want to continue to have in terms of responding. But the monies that they are speaking of that are required to efficiently respond, raising very, very concerning questions. But a conversation that we are going to have as we continue to progress with the year. And of course, across business forums, development engagements, policy conversations, we saw a growing recognition that progress is not achieved in isolation. And that is very important. We saw a growing recognition. It is not achieved in isolation, whether it was conversations around youth employment, which was critical, in the backdrop of the unemployment rate in Eswatini, particularly considering that we are a young population, but also women's economic participation, MSME development, or regional trade. One theme was consistent, that collaboration is no longer optional. So with that in mind, we want to understand that these were not just stories that we reported here on Eswatini TV, but they were signals. And as signals, they continue to inform what we should continue to talk about, about where the economy is tightening and where it's opening, about where institutions are being tested, about where citizens are demanding more, and rightly so, and about the responsibilities that come with leadership in uncertain times. So our leaders across the country will continue to hold you accountable and have you here on our show because you were sent in public offices to really respond and help citizens. So as we begin 2026, the task before us is not just merely to predict the year that is ahead, but to interpret it responsibly as we were doing in 2025. And that is the pledge that we have here on Kusile Breakfast Show, to ask better questions, to continue to interrogate policy beyond what it is that is written on the documents, to continue to have meaningful conversations that will continue to help us understand and develop the Kingdom of Eswatini, but firstly, its citizens and the economy at large. So that is how we wake up this morning, by making this pledge and reflecting on 2025 and looking ahead for what is going to happen in 2026 as we continue to connect the decisions that were made in boardrooms and offices to their real world consequences in your home, in your farm, as well as your businesses. Here on Kusile Breakfast Show, that remains our commitment and our priority. Good morning again. We'll go for a quick ad break. We'll be back with our local news. Stay with us.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.za. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Ngoswatla mahle sichubekane luhlelo lwethu kuyinyalo sitawubukana tindzaba tethu tesiswati kumqoka kwekuthi sive sitisonzete kuNkulunkulu makucala umnyaka sicele kuthethelelwa etiphambe kweneni temnyaka lophelako siphindze ke sinxusele netibusiso temnyaka lomusha lokhu kuvetwe baholi bemabandla kanye nebafundisi ngesikhathi lamabandla abambe tinkonzo tekujuba umnyaka.
Nanoma timvula betibuye ngemandla ngalesithathu ebusuku kusa kwangalesine, bazalwane bemabandla lehlukene bahambe ngelivi lenkosi encwadzini yetikronike tekucala sicephu se-16 livesi le-11 lelithi fundanisa imakatse longemandla enu bangena eminyakeni lomusha batfumisa bagwaba batinxusela kulomdzala wetinsuku kungena eminyakeni lomusha. Baholi bemabandla lehlukene ke bondlela abazalwane ngemave.
Funani kuqala lona ngumlayeto ovela kuJesu. siyabona ukuthi sekungena umkhuhlane nasesondweni. Sekusuke etimbi, sekusuke lokwa, kusuke kuphikisana, lisondo sesiliguqule salenda into longazi umbuthano nje. Kanti lisondo impilo. Le mpilo ibonakala etendweni temihla ngemihla nasekuthi phatheni kwemihla ngemihla.
Singena kweminyaka lo wa-2026 inkosi yamemethela imemethela ngokuthi noma kulo yakho bezigwatshiwe kulo mnyaka wa-2025 ngekwekho inkosi engavumusa izingogwatshiwe. Hallelujah.
Sibonga, siyabonga. Sisho njalo ke sithi isenta yabo konke emehlo ethu athawasose kuJesu. uJesu losenzisa umuntu, uJesu lesiyawuphendula kuye nasekuphela isikhathi emhlabeni. Ngakho nje selibandla sithi lokukhulukade uphila impilo yokholo. Ukholwa yini? Ukholwa livi lasimakade. Ukholwa ukuthi Jesu wafa, wavuka wasela wena. Ubambe kona lokho. Bese ke uphila impilo lengiyo.
eBhayibhelini nangabe ufunda ngale nombolo lethi 6. Le nombolo lengi-6 kuthiwa inombolo yemuntu. La ebuntwini bethu sitawubona uNkulunkulu kulomnyaka thina singena eveni lesethembiso kulomnyaka. Noma uyafuna noma kawufuni singena eveni lesethembiso. Sitawungena kuvaliwe. uNkulunkulu Israel wamnika lelive. Babe bakhona abantu labalakhathi. uNkulunkulu tawusinika tinto babe bakhona labanye abantu. La kule tinto kodwa libe selilethu kodwa kunebantu lakhathi.
Bazalaneke ngaleti inkonzo batibekile emthandazweni bendlala tifiso tabo teminyaka kuye lo mdzala wethu insuku. Lo bikako nguSamkelisiwe Khoza eMbabane.
Imvula lebeyicitheka ngemandla etindzaweni letahlukene yehlulekile ke kuvimba sive ukuthi sitijabulise emicimbini yekujuba umnyaka leyahlukene. Noma beliyithela sive besidansa sihlabela. Kanti ke lokhu kubonakele emicimbini leyahlukene lebanjelwe etindzaweni tekutijabulisa kuleli kunembiko.
Bathanzi bekutijabulisa badanse kwadzela sibukeli noma beliyithela. Imicimbi lesiyivakashele ifake ekhathi umcimbi wekujuba umnyaka lobanjelwe eHappy Valley lowatiwa ngele crossover homecoming lapho bekushiyana ngemtshefezo ngekwembatha kwakanokusho. Lo mcimbi ukhange nebantfu labachamuka kulamanye emave labatawujuba umnyaka kuleli labafaka ekhatsi lababuya eveni leMozambique, eSouth Africa kanye naseTaiwan. Lesive lebesijabulile sithite sethemba ukuthi umnyaka lokucalako utawuba nematfuba langcono lafaka ekhatsi ematfuba emsebenti kanye nemali lenengi.
Yeah, I love the experience. It's fun. All right. Happy New Year.
You know what? It was pretty good. It was pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. Hopeful, quite hopeful. I expect more. So fingers crossed.
I'm very excited for this, but it's raining. I hate raining.
How was your 2025?
My 2025 is very good. I think so. It's very good. But I have something bad, but I think it's very good.
The experience is amazing. You know what? The rain, it was looking like Latina if not Sandela Pass. But you know what? Because we have rain energy that is coming to this event, so nobody really cares about the rain. People are just having fun. So that's a great energy to be with.
Yes, I really enjoy the vibe. Everyone's looking very good. Yes, it's perfect.
We decided that Eswatini is our home. We will spend every crossover. This is second time. Last year we were here in the same place. Today again we came back. Next year as well we will be here.
My 2025 was very good, and I hope so for 2026.
Indzawo yekutijabulisa iSolanis beyinemcimbi lomkhulukade wekujuba umnyaka lapho bekunebahlabeleli bakuleli kuphela labathide imicimbi lenjena itawusita kutfutfukisa emakhono abo.
Ukusibeka kakhulu ngoba wonke umuntu ujabulile ukusibona futhi.
Siyabonga kakhulu kuSolanis as local creatives, entertainers. All of them were booked, well paid. Sma locals, sakha kwethu, supporter kwethu, sigcoka local. La iSolanis we just made history. Shout out to Solanis. Shout out to wonke Maswati lafikile.
It's my first time here, and it's a nice place to be. Just enjoying life. Happy New Year!
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hallelujah!
Nakudzabuka kusa kubhonyiswe ema-fireworks kwaba manyamanya. Imicimbi lenjengalena ifaka sandla lesibandi ekukhangeni tivakashi letichamuka nangephandle kwelive. Kubika Sondo Mlangeni, eMbabane.
Bucala lobuhambe embili enhlane sifundza sakahoho kulomnyaka wa 2025 kube ngiboke lobo bekuhlukubetana netebulili gender based violence lokho kuvakele ngamanje wenkantolo yasesipiki inkosi Ngiphile Maseko uma saxoxisana nensatheli yalomsakatho ngalwesithathu.
Njengoba sesiwephetha umnyaka insatheli yalomsakatho ithe nje ake ihlale phasi namanje wenkantolo yasesipikile kungiyona ibuke emaqala enhlanahoho emetameni ekuthotetela ukuthi engabe ngwaphi nje emaqala lathe kuhlupha ikakhulu lawo lavele emahlandla phambi kwayo lenkantolo.
Sisebenzile lokuqala umnyaka sabuka emaqala kule nkantolo le yasesipiki. Maningi amaqala esiwabukile la ngithanza nje ukuveta ukuthi la kasinikete ukukhuluma lokuningi ngilabo gender based violence kakhulu ngepha-ke ngokusebenzisa umthetho kukhona umthetho we-SOTV lo washaywa nga-2018 siyazama ukuthi siwusebenzise lowo mthetho lowo ukukhalimele Maswati ukuthi atiphathe kahle nalabo housebreaking nani kukhona lokho kepha kuncane la speak ngilabo murder nje but nje lokukhulu ngile gender based violence so lokho siyakukhuta ngamagama lakagcinile.
Maseko-ke sekephetha ubuye wakhuthatha sona sive ukuthi sichinge sitiphathe kahle nakuwo umnyaka wa 2026.
Umlayeto lokhona nje losuka la speak ukuthi eMaswati akatube katiphathe kahle siwujube kahle umnyaka sitiphatheni kahle sonke sihlaleni kahle nema-families ethu emakhaya kuhlukubetana kube kuncane.
Live leSwatini-ke solo liphokophele njalo ekulweni nekucitsa bona bucala bekuhlukubetana ngetebulili kuwo eMaswati. Kubika Thabiso Maphanga esipiki.
Inzabente emidlalo Victor Dlamini lokhulumela inhlangano lengamele umdlalo wemadubane lapha eveni uthi isikhathi sesifikile sekwekuthi itingijimi takuleli titfole timendlela njalo nathi kuyakungenela imichithelwano yangephandle kwakuleli hayi nje kungeda tinombolo kuphela njengoba emave akubomakhelwane lafaka ekhatsi live laseBotswana kanye neleningizimu Afrika ayatitfola timendlela. Dlamini bekakhuluma nalomsakatho eMbabane.
Eminyakeni lophelile itingijimi takuleli tikhonile ukuthi tigcutselane ngaphandle kwakuleli kusuka kubadlali abancane bawo lomdlalo kuya kulabadzala kanzi livela khona kuthola imendlela emidlalweni ema-relays eveni laseBotswana. Victor Dlamini lokhulumela inhlangano emadubane kuleli uthi sikhathi sokuthi timendlela letitholwa ngito tingijimi natingenela imidlalo yangaphandle tibe tinengi setifile.
But the time has come. The time is now kwekuthi i-podium finish singathethi Eswatini masikhiphe ema-athletes ukuthi ngaphandle kwelive babuye netindondo. Kubhlungu lokubuka lokuthi mawathi uyabuka emavele amanyendi uyawabona ayachamuka boBotswana sebakhuluma ngekuthi bane ma-gold medalist. Lamavele awo mave lebesembeko awuthine ngalomdlalo emadubane kaThen but nyalo sesiphethe singemuva siyasala but ke with the current executive lekhona nginethemba lokuthi le vision yawo sitayibona le improvement nekuthi ke our athletes akhone kwekuthi abuye netindondo kuma-game kuma-competitions lesinawo lakhaya nangephandle.
Dlamini uphindze wakhuthaza labakhulu kuhulumende kanye netinkampani ukuthi babonakale bahamba embili ekungeneleni ama-half marathons nama-marathons kutawukhuthaza CVM.
Kungaba kuqela ukuthi uma ngabe sinalama marathons nalama track and field laba labakhulu kuhulumende emahhovisi abatimbanza kanye nathi because uma lesive sibona ukuthi bo minister ema MPs bo PS bakhona la sikhona khona sive silane khona ngetemidlalo ngicabanga ukuthi lokho kutawona ukuthi abantu bakhona ukuthi nami angiye lapha enakwini kumgcoka singabi sodwa abalide by example as baba senior positions even lana we need each other if nje ngithi hulumende siyambambisa ngekuthi ngithi uma ngabe sive sithi sikushumisa umtimba siba semgwaqweni siba sikuphi ngetombolo lesetulu I can assure you ukuthi ngetombolo letawuncipha leli sibedlela lapha siyaqula emlangeni lapha siphethwe boshukela bo cancer bo BP manje uyabuka lento leyo uma singasukuma sibe banyenti sibabaza umgwaqo sikhuthale tingehla letinakweni letinombolo.
Dlamini uphethe ngekuveta ukuthi umnyaka wa-2026 kubheke ukuthi kube nemicutsulwano leminyenti yelibanga lelidze kucala ku-Resolution Run ye-Big Game Park eMlilwane mhla ka-25 kuye Bhimbidvwane. Lobikako uLinda Dlamini eMbabane.
Tingakwenza bathethu tesiswati sitawahlola etimakethe sitawubuya sichubeka nehlelo masinyane hlala nathi.
When you choose your adventures, you do so with an open heart and a desire for the unexpected. You embark on journeys to discover new worlds full of wonder. You choose a path to awaken your senses, a world to make you look up and realize just how inspiring this life can be. Arrive and awaken your heart. Explore life in ways only thought possible in your dreams. Discover just how far you go to expand your understanding of life's greatest mysteries. There's just one place on this planet with so much to offer. Now is the time for you to have the royal experience.
All right, welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We'll look at this United Nations briefing faced with rising populism and legislative gridlock, efforts to shrink finances, and France's famous social safety net have hit a wall. We explore what could be lost, the risks of delay, and what may force change. Let's look.
In 2019, France watched a national treasure go up in flames. Now, there's a fear that the structures holding up French politics are starting to catch.
There is clearly a problem with French public finances.
For the worsening of the budget deficit. France's political crisis deepened today.
Most French citizens adore their nation's system of social safety nets, but those programs have become increasingly unsustainable. France has the euro area's largest deficit, massive debt, and every attempt at reform has ended the same way.
Surprise resignation from the Prime Minister.
4 Prime Ministers in 20 months.
We're heading into our 5th Prime Minister now in 2 years.
French politics is in a bit of a mess. It really is an unprecedented crisis.
Benefit reform sparks this. Unions break out the flares, and fragile coalitions collapse under the strain.
France is currently characterized by political blockage due to a very difficult public finance situation.
What people talk about is sort of a gradual sort of suffocation of France's ability to deal with its fundamental economic problems.
History suggests that at this point it's more likely that only a shock can force change. The question is what or who would deliver it? The French government has a long history of running up debt.
Last year, France paid about 60 billion euros in interest alone, which is about equivalent to its defence spending.
We're on course for 100 billion a year in debt servicing costs by the end of this decade.
We live in a world where all countries are taking on debt post-COVID, but I think France is definitely a concerning standout.
You can see just how grave the debt burden is by comparing it to Germany's over the last 20 years.
What you see is that they're more or less at the same level until the global financial crisis. And then both their debt burdens start to increase, but France's increases further. And then you get to the Eurozone debt crisis, and while Germany manages to correct after the crisis, France's debt burden just keeps ticking up. And that has sort of happened again in COVID.
And actually, it's likely to continue to increase in the future. If nothing is done, it can only increase. There were some forecasts that say that the debt to GDP ratio will reach 125%, but other forecasts are pointing to 150% in 2035.
Meanwhile, those tens of billions of euros in interest payments must continue. That's money that can't be spent on what the public expects.
France is characterized by a very high level of public spending, around 57% of GDP.
The euro area is closer to 50%, Germany is below that, the UK is below that, the US is closer to 40%. One of the key challenges to that is the sort of almost sacred role of the social security system in France. This idea that the French state is responsible for ensuring equality and solidarity, fraternity between citizens in education, in health, unemployment insurance and pensions.
So protecting the people and protecting mostly the oldest people in the country. So 60% of those public spending is going to the oldest people in the country.
Pensions are one of the main reasons France's debt keeps rising and markets keep sweating.
What might be a private pension system in other countries runs through the balance sheet of the French state.
For a lot of people, it can go above 3,000 euros a month, so it is much higher than the wage on average. So it's very important for public opinion. They are very protective about this.
Protests erupted across France in 2023 when the government raised the retirement age from 62 to 64.
More than 500,000 people marched across France.
Macron and the government are attacking one of the central rights of the working class.
As the society gets older and as the working population relative to people out of work shrinks, it basically costs a lot more to keep that coverage going.
So now France has rising debt, swelling pension bills, fewer workers and shrinking tax revenue. In finance, this is what's technically known as not ideal. Now, in a perfect world, you'd fix this with a mix of higher taxes, lower benefits or short-term borrowing until growth catches up. But, and sorry if this comes as a depressing surprise, we don't live in a perfect world.
We know also that from innovation point of view, Europe is really much struggling to catch up.
So for now, France keeps borrowing. But lenders usually shy away from heavily indebted, politically gridlocked countries. And because about 60% of French debt is held abroad, France is especially exposed to swings of investor sentiment.
I think you can see from, for example, credit downgrades recently, a lot of concern from rating agencies and debt investors to the direction of travel of French public finances.
Now that has a kind of a feedback loop because as bond investors lose confidence, they tend to sell the bonds and that drives up the borrowing costs for France.
It shows up clearly in the French-German spread, the premium France pays to borrow compared with Germany, the Eurozone's benchmark.
So they're borrowing around 2.7%, France is around 3.5%. So that difference is 0.8 percentage points or 80 basis points. That is the measure of the spread. So why does that matter? The spread is this sort of extra cost for the French state to finance itself, but it's important also because that has a ripple effect through the economy. It has a big bearing on mortgages, on consumer loans, on loans that businesses need to invest. And so the spread is the price that the whole French economy pays for the political instability, for the uncertainty.
So, a large number of French voters won't accept reduced benefits, but the state can't afford them, and borrowing costs are therefore on a tear. Why is this so hard to fix?
France has been in uncharacteristic political instability since the snap elections in 2024.
You need to understand two things. France has a president, that's this chap, but it also has something of a problematic addiction to switching prime ministers.
I think we are at the fourth one, or fifth one.
It's hard to keep count, actually.
So Edouard Philippe, Elisabeth Borne.
She was then replaced by Gabriel Attal.
Barnier.
Barnier was brought down in a no-confidence vote.
Then Bayrou.
That's 4.
And no, Sébastien Lecornu.
In fact, Sébastien Lecornu has resigned and then been reappointed. So in some respects, we've had 6 prime ministers that have tried to reckon with this very unstable political situation.
That is leading to a stuck parliament that cannot find agreements and that cannot make reforms that are needed in order to solve the very big issue of the public finance situation.
Because everybody has their eye on the next presidential election, nobody wants to be seen to be pushing through unpopular measures for a budget.
Things like Exhibit A.
You still have 2/3 of the French opposed to the pension reform.
So that's why we just keep getting this instability. It's because France needs a budget, but France can't actually get one together.
The political stalemate is also preventing Eurozone unity in the face of outside challenges.
Europe is in a situation where it needs to go toe-to-toe with China and the US.
The world needs a credible and strong Europe. And you can't have a credible and strong Europe without a credible and strong France. France, along with Germany, really is the core of the euro. Together, they make up half of the euro area's GDP. France also is the biggest food producer in the EU. It has the biggest army, and it has nuclear weapons.
Many experts say only the 2027 presidential race can break the impasse. But that too is a source of anxiety for markets and world leaders.
We know that in 2027, Macron is gone. So who will replace him?
All parties are thinking about the presidential election. They are all positioning themselves for the campaign.
The far right is potentially on track to win the next election, whether it's parliamentary, but especially presidential. That could really pressure the euro area.
I mean, you look at the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party has done it very well in recent legislative elections.
Both the far left and the far right are proposing a lot more spending, and they both would double down on the current problems without really tackling them. I think that it would be quite a challenge for European partners and the euro if you had France go in this direction.
So, is there any optimism to be found while we wait?
To be fair to Macron, he has had a lot of success in pushing through what we call structural reforms to, make it easier to invest or easier to hire, more flexibility in the labour force.
And amid the gloom, Notre Dame endures, a reminder that France can find unity when it needs it most.
The restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral is really one of the few good news stories that's come out of France. Macron made a promise that in 5 years' time, the cathedral will be reopened and restored. And he kept that promise, I think down to a few reasons that might apply to the current crisis facing France. The first is Macron set a deadline and stuck to it. That takes leadership. Secondly, in all of French society, right up to the ultra-rich, gave money to help fund the restoration. And finally, there was a real willingness to think outside of the box. Not every onerous building regulation was followed. There was a lot of creativity and a lot of seriousness, and I think that that could help a political crisis like this one.
Well, that was a Bloomberg original on how France can, whether France can fix its debt problem. We'll go for a quick ad break. We'll be back and look at some developments happening in the United Nations as they continue to scope and track the developments that are happening within the world, particularly around the stories, or rather the crisis response division that is going to brief the United Nations Council. Stay with us.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.sz. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
When you choose your adventures, you do so with an open heart and a desire for the unexpected. You embark on journeys to discover new worlds full of wonder. You choose a path to awaken your senses, a world to make you look up and realize just how inspiring this life can be. Arrive and awaken your heart. Explore life in ways only thought possible in your dreams. Discover just how far you go to expand your understanding of life's greatest mysteries. There's just one place on this planet with so much to offer. Now is the time for you to have the royal experience.
Welcome back. Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific of the United Nations, Khalid Kiari, and the Director of OCHA's Crisis Response Division, Ida Mosonu, will brief the Council. The United Nations is deeply concerned by the escalating violence that is placing civilians at extreme risk and triggering new waves of displacement, particularly in the Kordofan region.
All right. First, the good news. Deji, don't look so shocked when I say good news. I know. Well, the good news is that this is the last briefing of the year. Fingers crossed. If we wind up briefing before the end of the year, it will there will be a lot of bad news. So we will post the updates online starting tomorrow. The office will be staffed during daylight hours, except obviously for Christmas Day and New Year's Day. And if you need anything, call somebody else, not me. Let me start with Sudan. Just to flag that this afternoon there will be a Security Council meeting on Sudan, an open briefing. Our Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and Pacific, Khalid Kiari, from the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, will brief. Also briefing will be the Director of OCHA's Crisis Response Division, Idem Mosonu. She will brief, of course, on the humanitarian aspect of the Sudan crisis. But I can tell you in advance of that briefing that we are, of course, deeply concerned by the escalating violence that is continuing to place civilians at grave risks and triggering new waves of displacement, new waves of human suffering, particularly in the Kordofan regions. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that in South Kordofan state, displacement has increased sharply in recent days. Our friends at the International Organization for Migration estimate that on Friday, heightened insecurity drove nearly 500 people to flee villages in the locality of Reef Sharki and seek refuge in Kadugli and surrounding areas, as well as in North Kordofan state. Displacements into White Nile state is also rising, with more than 15,000 human beings arriving from the Kordofan region since late October. That's what local authorities are telling us. And in eastern Sudan, local authorities yesterday reported the arrival of some 400 people in Gedaref. They arrived there from Baba Nusa and Hejlig, towns that are in the West Kordofan state. While community kitchens have provided immediate food support, shelter assistance is urgently needed, particularly as we expect more people to arrive seeking safety. Meanwhile, in the Darfur region, the International Organization for Migration estimates that more than 107,000 people were displaced from North Darfur state capital El Fasher and surrounding villages between late October, when the Rapid Support Forces, as you recall, violently took over the city, and early December. Many had already been displaced multiple times, fleeing camps such as Zamzam and Abu Shuk. Our partners report that last week, more than 2,500 people displaced from El Fasher and surrounding areas arrived in the locality of Sharia in South Darfur state. These newly arrived families urgently need food, they urgently need an essential relief item, and they urgently need health services. Civilians in the Darfur region continue to face deadly violence. On Saturday, a drone strike reportedly hit a busy market in Al-Mala in North Darfur state, killing at least 10 people. That's what first responders are telling us. The violence is part of a broader pattern that continues to devastate Sudan's health system. WHO warns that attacks on healthcare facilities have reached alarming levels. In 2025 alone, 65 such attacks in Sudan caused more than 1,600 deaths. That's accounting for over 80% of all global deaths from attacks on healthcare in complex emergencies last year worldwide. As the year draws to a close, we continue to urge all parties to immediately halt attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, uphold international humanitarian law, and ensure safe, unhindered humanitarian access so the year is not marked by the same misery as we've seen previously. Turning to the situation in Gaza, our colleagues at the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that humanitarians continue to deliver assistance to help the most vulnerable families endure the dire situation on the ground, especially during this cold and wet season. Over the past 24 hours, and despite the ceasefire, we have continued to receive reports of airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire in all 5 governorates of Gaza. This has resulted in reported casualties and disruptions to humanitarian operations. Yesterday, a rescue mission to reach an injured person in Gaza was denied. Amid the severe lack of shelter across the Strip, people are staying in buildings that are either partially or mostly damaged as they try to protect their families from elements. Our partners in Gaza said over the weekend several buildings collapsed due to stormy conditions, with casualties reported. A reminder that 3/4 of women-headed households urgently need shelter support, and 2/3 urgently need clothing. That's what the Gender in Humanitarian Action Working Group has found. Our partners continue to work to improve access to dignified shelter for approximately 1.3 million people in Gaza. In the past week, about 3,500 families affected by storms or living in flood-prone areas received tents, bedding sets, mattresses, and they also received blankets. Additionally, more than 250,000 children received winter clothing. However, our partners estimate that 630,000 adolescents across the Gaza Strip still need winter clothing assistance. we and our partners continue to call once again for the lifting of all restrictions of the entry of aid into Gaza, including shelter material, as these obviously constrain our humanitarian response to reach all those people who need shelter, especially in this cold and rainy season. Meanwhile, we and our partners continue to coordinate humanitarian missions within Gaza. OCHA reports that yesterday half of such attempts were facilitated by Israeli authorities. Through these missions, humanitarian teams collected 6 full tankers of fuel, more than 270 pallets of medical supplies and other essential items from the Karim Shalom Abu Salam crossing as well as the Zikim crossing. Turning to the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, and our colleagues on the ground tell us that hostilities this weekend resulted in more civilian casualties and widespread damage to critical infrastructure. Between Friday and early morning, authorities report more than a dozen civilians were killed and over 70 others injured, including 2 children. Basic services disruptions were reported in over 270 towns and villages across the country. The region of Odessa was particularly hard hit. They've been experiencing almost daily attacks. On Friday, an overnight attack targeting port infrastructure killed 8 civilians and injured 27 others. That's what local authorities are telling us. Repeated strikes also caused power outage, affecting dozens of thousands of people. The regions of Dnipro, of Kharkiv, and Mykolaiv also sustained attacks on their energy infrastructure, with hundreds of thousands of people affected. The health facilities and a school were also damaged in the attack. Donetsk, Kherson, Zaporizhzhia also suffered casualties. Authorities also report that a warehouse storing humanitarian aid was damaged in the Mykolaiv region following an attack on Saturday. Meanwhile, evacuations from frontline and border areas are continuing. In Sumy, over the last 3 days, around 40 people were evacuated to safer areas, and in Donetsk region, nearly 330 civilians, including 50 children, were evacuated. Since June 1st, nearly 150,000 people have been evacuated from frontline areas, including more than 16,500 children and over 5,000 people with limited mobility. Humanitarians reached more than 700,000 people near the front lines with aid in the first 11th month of this year. However, funding gaps persist, as you would imagine, leaving more than 1 million people without safe water and limiting access to protection and gender-based violence services in those high-risk areas. This year's $2.6 billion humanitarian appeal for Ukraine is only half funded, with $1.4 billion having been received. Quick update from Julie Bishop, our special envoy on Myanmar. In carrying out her mandate, the special envoy engaged with all stakeholders relevant to the situation in Myanmar, including regional countries, Security Council, and General Assembly members. As part of the effort, she recently visited Myanmar for a 3rd time and met again with the Commander-in-Chief, Senior General Mint Aung Hlaing. In her engagements, Ms. Bishop continues to reiterate the urgent need for a cessation of violence to enable humanitarian response and recovery and protections of civilians, and underscores the need to keep Myanmar on the global agenda and provide sustained support towards a Myanmar-led, sustainable, inclusive, and peaceful solution to the protracted crisis. She did brief council members in close consultations this morning via video conference. And an update, and a rather lengthy one, from Somalia, for which we have not heard for a bit. Our humanitarian colleagues report that drought continues to impact millions of people across Somalia. Authorities estimate that more than 4.6 million people, or around about a quarter of the population of the country, are being impacted by the drought. Our partners indicate that at least 120,000 people were displaced between September and December. As water prices soar, food becomes increasingly scarce, livestock die, and livelihoods collapse. Education has also been severely impacted, with more than 75,000 students forced to drop out of school nationwide. The upcoming dry season between January and March is expected to make drought conditions worse. Increased water scarcity and higher livestock mortality are anticipated, potentially intensifying food insecurity in many parts of Somalia. The situation is also likely to drive more people from their homes towards urban areas and displacement sites, where living conditions and where livelihood opportunities are already extremely limited. Authorities are appealing for urgent assistance to avert a possible collapse of pastoral and farming livelihoods and prevent avoidable loss of life. They warn that the next 4 months will be critical as the rainy season is not expected until April 2026. We and our humanitarian partners are mobilized, supporting assessment, mapping available supply stocks, and coordinating emergency response across water, food, nutrition, health, and shelter sectors. Our partners are also providing cash assistance, animal fodder, and rehabilitating boreholes as they visit field locations to assess the severity of the situation and review resources for early action. However, these efforts are constrained yet again here by significant funding shortfalls. The Central Emergency Response Fund from the UN allocated $10 million at the end of November, but substantially more support is urgently needed. The $1.4 billion humanitarian response plan for Somalia for 2025 is only 26% funded, with only $370 million received. Speaking of money, I have a little quiz for you today. You ready? Recent Secretaries General have had a long, crucial history with this country, assisting it on its hard-won road to independence. Very good, E.D. Letter, and I was about to go to the second hint, which is the current Secretary General holds this country dear to his heart, having recently visited in 2024 to mark the 25th anniversary of the vote. We say thank you to our friends in Dili, East Timor, Timor-Leste's payment brings the number of fully paid-up member states to 149. Edie, what a way to end the year.
Thank you, Steph. A couple of follow-up questions. On Sudan, the president of Sudan, I understand, is here at the United Nations. The Prime Minister. Yeah. Sorry. Is he going to meet with the Secretary General?
The Secretary General is not here today. He's on his annual leave. We're trying to see who he may be meeting. I've asked and I'm trying to find that out.
And secondly, on Venezuela, it's been reported from the region that President Maduro has asked a number of different bodies for assistance in light of the U.S. boarding of ships and pursuing of ships, including the United Nations. Has the UN received such a request?
I'm not aware, beyond the phone call the Secretary General and the President had, I think, last week, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not aware of any new communications, but we'll check. Madame, and then.
Going back to Sudan, is the Secretary General planning to go to Sudan? Because he has been traveling a lot, but not to Sudan.
Obviously, we are looking at a whole host of potential trips for the Secretary General for next year. It will depend on whether or not such a visit would be helpful. But I can tell you he's been spending a lot of his time focused on the situation there and through the work of his representative on the ground, Denise Brown, the work of his envoy, Mr. Lamamra, and the work of Mr. Fletcher and others.
Yeah, but don't you think his presence will make a difference?
He's very well aware of the potential of a visit. It just has to make sure that such a visit actually puts the process forward. Deji, then Joe, then Gabriel.
A couple of questions first. Today in Kuala Lumpur, the foreign ministers of ASEAN held a special meeting on the current situation between Cambodia and Thailand. They released a statement here in my hand. They just reaffirmed the shared commitment to refrain from threat of use of force and peaceful settlements. They urge both parties, Cambodia and Thailand, to exercise maximum restraint and also welcome the discussion on the resumption of the ceasefire, which will happen 2 days later. What is the response from the Secretary General on the latest statement by the ASEAN countries and on the latest this
We
development?
very much welcome the statement by ASEAN and the role that Malaysia has been playing as chair of ASEAN, and obviously the role of the United States in helping get that agreement signed on the sidelines of the meeting earlier this year. I think it's important that both parties approach the meetings on the 24th in a spirit of ending this conflict.
All right, next question on the contribution. Since last time, has the U.S. paid any regular budget?
No.
Not single? What about the peacekeeping one they promised?
I'd have to check on peacekeeping.
But not regular
not
budget.
Regular budget.
In terms, just like we have just one week or two left, do you expect any payment from U.S.?
Look, I don't want to say anything that would make a challenging situation worse.
Yeah, that's exactly why I asked this question. Without payment, how would the situation in the coming year, especially the first few months for 2026, be for the UN?
When member states vote a budget, right, and approve a budget, and when not all member states pay up to that budget, it makes the situation for the Secretary General, for all of those who manage the cash in this organization, extremely, extremely challenging. And I think, as the Secretary General has alluded to in the beginning of the year, he's instructed the Secretariat not to spend the 100% because we don't have it. The fact that member states either don't pay or pay late makes managing an organization where you can't borrow money like private sector or like governments, or you can't print money like governments can, rather difficult, and that would be an understatement.
Will the UN still be able to pay salaries? Let me put it in a very single.
I mean, through the end of the year, yes.
The beginning of next year?
Well, we have to have a budget first. We don't have spending authority for 2026 as of yet. Mr. Klein.
First, to follow up on that question, has the Secretary General himself or the Chef de Cabinet or the Deputy Secretary General reached out personally to any high-level Trump administration officials to inquire when they expect to at least make partial payment of the assessments?
I can tell you that the financial situation, the budget, the reform, the savings have been high on the agenda of all the contacts the Secretary General has had with Ambassador Waltz.
Well, no, I'm talking about the specific issue of non-payment by
I understand.
the U.S.
We are working through the U.S. mission, through Ambassador Waltz, and I can tell you that the Secretary General and the Ambassador, I think, have a very good professional and working relationship.
Okay, then now to my more general question, similar to what I asked, I think, last year, which is what would the Secretary General consider to be his biggest disappointment in 2025, and what is he most proud of in accomplishing in 2025?
Okay. I think the Secretary General is...
Right, that was a report by the United Nations on Sudan-occupied Palestinian territory and other topics, and we want to sign off our second episode of the year 2025, and we do want to not to be negligent and not mention the Kusile region, which of course led the nation through education. You will remember that grade 7 results came out on Tuesday, and this past year, 2025, the Kusile region emerged as the exceptional leaders throughout the country. And of course, the credit goes to the learners who believed and studied, but not only the learners, their parents and guardians as well, who guided their children and made sure that they believe in themselves and they continue to study, but also the leadership of the Kusile region, who continue to invest and make sure that the pupils in the Kusile region continue to strive for excellence. Ngesiswati nje sesiphetha uhlelo lethu sithi sihloma eluthini sifundza sase Kusile, la khona bantfana bakhona belibanga laka grade 7 bahambe embili live lonke ebangeni laka grade 7. Siyababongela kakhulu. We've come to the end of our episode. Enjoy your weekend responsibly. We'll see you again next week, Monday. Goodbye.